Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Welcome to this episode of the Heist podcast. I'm joined by Mohammed on this episode where we're discussing the concept of education, going into education, the problems that brings, the benefits, and specifically in relation to the recent discussion that was sparked online about women's education. Should women be focused on education just as much as men? Should Muslim women go to university, etc.? This is part one of a two-part episode. So it's really good, really interesting. A lot of deep stuff actually that we get into with this. So please enjoy. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Mind Heist, episode 15 something. I don't know yet. Assalamu alaikum Mohammed. You're joining me again.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am, alhamdulillah.
So, Mohammed, you are here because you're all about fatherhood, right? Was it faith and fatherhood and fitness? So we're here today to discuss the fatherhood part, right? So, mashallah, you got two daughters. And this was a very interesting topic that, Daniel Hakikaju kind of introduced to our conversation between me and you, in terms of the debate that he had about the idea. I mean, it was complicated, right? Like the concept that they were supposed to be debating, it wasn't clear. But basically, like, should Muslim women go to uni, or should Muslim women get education, or whatever it was, right? We still don't know till today what the topic was supposed to be about. But it was an interesting topic, if you can get beyond the controversy that the reaction some people had, that kind of knee jerk, like, oh my God, what the hell? If you actually think about it, it's kind of an interesting topic. And what you were saying is that it's interesting, but it was, the debate wasn't conducted in the most productive way where we can like take something from it. And also it wasn't like as grounded as it could have been in terms of real life. What should we do, right? That's correct, right?
Yes. So, with regards to the debate itself, obviously, as all debates tend to have a lot of spectacle, sensationalism, maybe a little bit of ego comes in, and the listeners, they come with their presupposed notions, their presuppositions. Maybe they don't listen to the whole debate. Maybe they listen, but they don't really understand what each party is trying to say. And just observing the comments, I don't believe that the vast majority of the people who are commenting, whether they were pro Hakikuchu in his position or against, I don't actually believe they understood what he was trying to say, and they may have misrepresented his views. So perhaps what we can do today is try and understand what he was trying to say, and then more importantly, what we can practically take away, what benefits there are, if there are any benefits, what criticisms there are, not with the objective of just being academic and analyzing the debate, and not with the objective of just talking or giving our own opinions on the subject, but to try and take away something constructive from it.
Yeah, exploring the topic basically. Like you said, like the debate wasn't conducted in a way where it's like you can really break down the main points that each side had. So that's why we have this article to help us out here. We're going to try and go through the main points, and just like you said, like go through it and see what we think. And like in like Mind Heist fashion, it's not about the debate. It's not about like the trending topic kind of thing. It's about the timeless topic of education, of raising daughters, of raising sons, and this kind of whole area, which is something that's relevant, 10 years ago and right now, and 10 years in the future. It's not about like jumping on this specific thing. So we don't need to like go too much into the actual debate. We'll go into the topics, inshallah. So go ahead.
Our objective is not to defend anyone or to attack anyone. It's not to take sides with anyone. It's not even to propagate our own opinions or to try and convince anybody of our opinions. It's to actually try and understand the topic and open up the discussion. Maybe a listener is going to be able to enlighten us with some insight after this podcast, or bring something to attention that we didn't know, and then we can all benefit together,
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the article we're using, like to go through the points, it starts with like, do women need education? Do men need education? And what is education, right? So I thought this was something in terms of what is education. This is something that was missing in the debate where they didn't define what is education. Yeah. So, yeah, and I think a basic point, and even Daniel Hakichu, he mentioned it in the article that, like, we know, like in Islam, we need fard ayn knowledge, right? That's fard for us. That's why it's called fard ayn knowledge. Every individual must know certain things. So that's like a given, right? That we must know certain basics, and those basics are like knowledge of the religion, right? Like aqidah, fiqh, like fiqh in terms of how to do your basic worship, how to conduct trade if you're in trade, how to marry, divorce, these things. When it becomes relevant to you, that's like fard for you to know, right? Now, I was wondering, like, when I was thinking about this, like, what is education even, or what's the minimum level of education that's fard ayn? Like, for example, if you need to know, Fatiha to pray, right? Do you need to know to read Arabic? Is that fard ayn?
I mean, one thing that comes to mind is, like you said, there is fard ayn knowledge, right? That every single Muslim must know. And there's also knowledge that is fard kifaya.
Yes.
So this is still an obligation upon the Muslims as a whole.
Yeah, but not on an individual level. Yeah.
And if the Muslims as a community are not fulfilling the fard kifaya knowledge, it becomes a sin upon all of the Muslims. And that includes knowledge of the religion, and it also includes knowledge of things that are considered to be secular or worldly. So since we mentioned the concept of fard ayn, it's important to mention the concept of fard kifaya.
Yeah.
And as such, if a person seek knowledge, even knowledge that isn't necessarily fard ayn, but they were doing it with the intention to lift that burden of the ummah, or to serve the ummah, or to aid Islam and the Muslims, they would still be rewarded and it would still be praiseworthy, right? So we don't want to restrict the discussion to should women get education or should men even get education, and then just focus on what is the fard ayn knowledge. Because we're saying should, we're not saying must. Right? We're not saying are people obliged to get knowledge. Should they, right? But I think the question you brought up is very important. What is education? Because for me, I personally have quite strong opinions about the education system, about the way we are educated. I mean, I've been in education. I've done a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I tried PhD a few times, but it didn't work out. I've worked as a teacher, as an educator. And it's clearly a problem with the education system, or many problems with the education system. And I can understand, it doesn't require much of a discussion for me or much convincing, why someone would be very critical of the education system as a whole, and why someone would question whether it's a worthwhile investment and whether it's a worthy trade-off. If we look at the benefits and the harms, or the potential benefits and the potential harms, to send children to put your children through main school secular education. Okay, so maybe that could be a starting point. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, one thing that came to mind is a bit of a tangent, but you know, like education itself is a bit new in terms of it being like everyone having an education, right? As far as I understand, Yani, like it's maybe since World War I, II kind of thing. I don't know. In the Muslim world, maybe it wasn't even widespread until even after that because of colonization and stuff, right? So, so it's like, yeah, of course, the way that we're teaching and learning these days might not be that good because we're new to it, right? Like hundreds of years ago, I mean, in Europe, for example, you had the concept of like these rich people, they might go to France and this country, and they would also go to the Muslim world sometimes to learn, right? And it was like a very elite thing to do, right? And then the average person, of course, most people like farming and stuff, they don't even really, maybe wouldn't even benefit from abstract education kind of thing, you know? So the fact that like the majority, you could say, of people are studying and learning, especially full time, it's new, right? It's like 50, 60, 70, whatever years old. And therefore it makes sense that we wouldn't be so good at it yet. And even when I was doing PGCE, the theory of learning, like understanding how people learn, it's still like we don't even know, really. Like it's still like a lot to learn there. So that's part of like the important context. It's like it's new, it's a new concept, so it makes sense that we wouldn't be that good at it right now. Although of course sometimes you make advances quickly, but you get what I'm saying, right? So yeah, so in terms of understanding what education is for, that would define the way you set out the education system, right?
So you said basically defining the purpose of education is going to influence what the education system looks like, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I really like that. I remember I was attending a lecture in Malaysia. That was the first time I tried to do my PhD. And there was a heavy focus on epistemology, theories of knowledge, education, Islamization of education, decolonization of the education system. And that was really fascinating for me to be introduced to that. And there was one lecture I remember where the professor who was talking about how the modern education system is primarily a political and economic tool, right? It's an economic tool in so much as that it's supposed to produce employees to support the country's economy, right? We want citizens in an economy that work and contribute to the economy, right? And it's political in so much that we want obedient citizens, right? We want citizens that will not challenge the status quo. We want citizens that are cultured by the culture of the elites of society, the culture that the majority of people of society follow, so that they don't rock the boat too much, right? So just by understanding that education has a purpose, the education system today wasn't developed to raise righteous children who defend the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it wasn't developed to raise you to be a spiritual being. It wasn't developed for you to learn your fard ayn knowledge. It wasn't even developed for you to learn your fard kifaya knowledge. Maybe that's your intention entering education, but that's not what the education is there for. It's there to create employees.
Yeah.
It's there to create obedient citizens of the state. And the state's ideology is going to influence the ideology being taught in the education system in order to produce that outcome, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like when you go to school and university and stuff, either you're going to a government school or you're going to a private school, the curriculum of which is determined by the government. So it's very much like your kids' education, our education is very much controlled by the government, right? And so now it's like, okay, is the government, if we think of any government really, is their objective like, forget like even the Islamic knowledge and getting people to become pious people, etc. Are they even, in the UK or France, or are they sitting down thinking, how do we build model citizens? How do we create cultured, citizens who have good thinking skills and they're like actually really smart, right? And they can like innovate and think outside the box. I really highly doubt that's even happening, right? It's more like probably what I imagine they're thinking about is, okay, the future is going to be, for example, cybersecurity. So how can we create university degrees that create cybersecurity graduates to fill that gap? And then how do we create the right kids coming out of school that will go into those degrees? Like this is what they're thinking about. Think about workforce, they're thinking about economics, like you say, which is nothing, it's not something you should like completely throw aside, right? But probably, you tell me what you think about this. Probably like as Muslims, we would firstly think of the priority, which is like, how can we create like, use education as a tool to get to Jannah and spread the word of Allah, right?
Yeah, I mean, so what you said is that they're probably not sitting around the table, putting down curriculums with the intention of producing, critical thinkers and people who uphold justice and in the Muslim world, people of Jannah, people that would defend the deen of Allah. And that's no secret, like economic efficiency is a very, very important element in the education system. I'll give you two examples. In the UK, I was doing a course like many years ago when I was a student, speed reading and photo reading and accelerated learning. And the lecturer said that, the power of this knowledge that we're learning, how to learn, and how this is not taught in schools, and how he had spoken to policymakers in the UK government, and he presented them with a plan to introduce speed reading, accelerated learning skills, and also to train the teachers to teach students based on their learning style, whether they're audio, visual, etc. And that he had a plan where a student could complete their entire education, including their degree, maybe by the age of 11 or 12. And he said this was not for the outliers of society. It was not for the really special students. Anybody can do this with the right skills and with the right training of teachers. And the reason that his idea was rejected is because it wasn't economically efficient. If everybody in society has a degree by the age of 12, firstly, degrees will lose their value. Secondly, we won't have enough qualified teachers to teach those students. We have enough primary school teachers, enough secondary school teachers, but we don't have enough university professors. Everybody's going to be getting a degree, right? Everybody gets a degree, and more people are going to go on to postgraduate studies. We don't have enough qualified teachers to teach those people. If everybody gets degrees and postgraduate degrees, people are not going to be willing to work jobs where they have to be, like unskilled labor jobs. Okay, so now when we look at the amount of money that is going to be invested to train staff that are able to produce these students and to prepare the classrooms. So one of the things is that the size of the classroom, the size of the classrooms would have had to become smaller, less students per class. The amount of money that would have to go into this kind of investment to produce these citizens by the age of 12 would not be cost effective, would not be efficient in any way, shape. It makes no sense economically. And so they rejected it. Another example, in Malaysia, Professor Attas, he's well known in the area of Islamization of knowledge and epistemology and the academic Islamic side of, Islamic studies from an academic perspective, right? He wanted to create a university, and he did establish a university, which was not economically efficient. It didn't care about the economic side of things, the numbers. He said, my objective is not to produce 100 students of Sharia every single year. Okay? My objective is to produce one Ibn Taymiyyah or one Imam Ghazali every 4 or 5 years. Because that's what the Ummah needs. The Ummah needs one Imam Ghazali, one Ibn Taymiyyah every couple of years, or even every year, to revive the religion of Allah. It doesn't need 100 low-quality Sharia graduates who haven't even memorized the Quran, which a lot of Sharia graduates, unfortunately, they don't even get to memorize the Quran, which shows you how inefficient or ineffective the education they're going through is. And initially, he got support from the Malaysian government, he got funding. And when he couldn't show results for the funding he was getting, they were learning Fusha, they were learning advanced English and English literature, they were learning Greek, Roman, Persian, they were learning all these languages, and then they were learning sciences of the Sharia, they were learning logic, they were learning academia. They were spending a lot of time in university. And the classrooms would have 3 to 4 students. So they'd have a professor coming from a Western country to teach Greek, okay, or to teach Latin for 3 or 4 students. And those students were going to be studying for the next 5, 6, 7 years of their life. After a few years, the Malaysian government had a change of heart. They realized that this was not economically efficient. They weren't seeing results. This is what you as a government, or not you and I, but this is what a government looks for. Numbers, tangible numbers to justify the money that's being spent.
Yeah.
Now, we're not saying that governments are wrong for thinking like this, but as somebody who's trying to be a Muslim, a strong believer, to raise children who serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should be aware of these things. And these things should certainly influence the decisions we make for our children. So let's say that there's a difference between what is public policy by way of necessity, because economics necessitates that public policy is a certain way, and what we adopt in our homes as Muslims who are trying to be like the picture behind you says, Kullukum ra'in, yani. All of us, we're trying to be shepherds, we're trying to be responsible fathers to raise children that are strong believers. So we need to be aware of these things, and that should influence our decisions.
Yeah, and we still have a lot of freedom to choose a lot of things still, alhamdulillah. So we can't say it's not our responsibility, this is just how it is. There is, depending on the person, there is a lot of things you can choose and think about and actually make active decisions in. So if we're going back to this question, what is education? I'm just thinking for men and women, right? It's good you mentioned fard kifaya knowledge, because you could say these days that what is fard kifaya knowledge, right? The minimum knowledge needed in the Muslim community, you could say, in any given country or whatever. It could be quite a high level actually, right? You could argue perhaps that we need every single Muslim has to be able to read and write, right? You could say they need to be able to use, I don't know, computers even, right? Certain things on computers. You could go very far. You could say they need to know maths, they need to know this, that, right? And so if we're still talking about this paradigm of like the fard things, whether it's kifaya or ayn, then we talk about daughters, we're talking about our daughters, like couldn't we get to the point where we're saying like, well, actually no, it's fard for like girls to reach XYZ year in school in terms of their knowledge?
Yeah, I think so. There's a few ways we can look at it. The first is, since we've acknowledged that there's fard ayn and there's fard kifaya, we should realize that the priority is for the fard ayn over the fard kifaya, right?
Yeah.
So we shouldn't miss out on the fard ayn or lose the fard ayn, or the opportunity cost for getting the fard kifaya can't be the fard ayn.
Sure.
Okay, so it can't be that you send your children to schools and universities and send them to study abroad in countries where they get doubts in their religion, where they get their aqidah corrupted, where they get their worldview and epistemology corrupted, using the fard kifaya argument. At the same time, the opportunity cost of getting that fard kifaya knowledge cannot be the fard ayn knowledge. It can't be, I can't send my son to madrasa, I can't send my daughter to madrasa, she can't read the Quran with tajweed, she can't even read Surah Al-Fatiha with tajweed, or he can't, they don't know how to do salah properly, they don't know their tahara, they don't know their fiqh of zakat, the fiqh of marriage by the time they get married, the fiqh of buyu'a and mu'amalat by the time they get employed. They don't know all of these things because they were too busy in school. That's an argument that's not going to stick. But let's say we have our priorities in place as parents in terms of what we want for our children, and we recognize what the fard ayn knowledge is and what the fard ayn, the other obligations apart from knowledge. So we know that as a man, for example, you are obliged, fard ayn upon you, to support your family. We can agree on that, right? So your ability to support your family cannot be compromised in the pursuit of fard kifaya knowledge. And I believe, since we're not just going to make this about women, right? I believe that the education system does sometimes, for many of us, contribute to this. What's my excuse? When I was 23 and I wasn't working, I'm a master's student, I'm doing a master's degree. I mean, I was working part-time, but I wasn't fulfilling my obligation, if we want to look at it like this, as a man, to provide for my family. Okay, I'm just working part-time. Why am I working part-time? Why am I not working full-time? Because I have this excuse, a socially acceptable excuse, that I'm doing university studies. Yeah. And this is like a far stretch, like 23. Why is a 15-year-old not working? Right? Why is a 15-year-old not studying the deen? Why is a 15-year-old not giving da'wah? Why is a 15-year-old incapable of supporting a family, whether it's parents, whether it's a spouse, whether it's children? It's because they have an excuse. They're in school. Who's going to work full-time when in school, right?
And that excuse is like never questioned, right? It's like even like me, for example, I didn't think once about getting a job when I was 15, right? It wasn't an option. And even when I was in uni, my dad's attitude is like I did like kind of, I was thinking like how to make money. Could I get part-time jobs, this and that? My dad's thing, and I think a lot of parents say this, is like, no, just do well in your studies, do well in your studies. And the assumption, of course, is like, you can't do well in your studies and in university and in a job. But also it's just like, it's like you said, it's completely socially acceptable to say like, look, I'm studying, so like, don't expect me to do anything else. That's like my responsibility in society is done. Yeah. I don't need to make money. I don't need to work. I don't need to help with the house. I don't even need to, like, if we're going to get to nitty gritty, like, I don't even need to like help wash the dishes at home because I'm studying. I'm in uni, you know?
And this is true for men and women.
Yeah.
Someone might say it's far-fetched to say that a 15-year-old should get married. Maybe in this time and age it is, but is it far-fetched to say that a 15-year-old should be helping his 65-year-old, 70-year-old dad with the bills in the house? Like, why should your dad, who's 65 or 70, be working a 9 to 5 and you're like in school, like flirting with girls on the playground? Like, it makes no sense. Do you know what I mean? Because let's be real, like, most of us are going to school, like, we're not necessarily there purely for knowledge. In fact, we're not learning. Like, if we talk about our days, we went to school together. You're jumping the fence, you're playing football, you're having picking fights with people, and you're getting by. So it's not like you're in some noble pursuit to seek knowledge and your father's making this great sacrifice so you can become this great scholar. That's not how it is, right? So why is it that a 15-year-old should be acceptable socially for a 15-year-old to be playing, because that's what essentially we were doing in school, whilst his 65-year-old dad is working a full-time job?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And on the flip side, why is it socially acceptable for a girl who's 15, 16, 17 to not help her mother around the house at all because she has homework, or because she's got school, or because she's got a school trip, or because she's doing some after school extracurricular activities?
Yeah.
We're not saying that those things shouldn't be done. We're just saying there's clearly an issue with our priorities.
Yeah. I think
And
it's
you
an
mentioned something,
imbalance. Go ahead. What did I
it's
say?
an imbalance.
Tell me about what I said that
You
was so
said
good.
there's an assumption that you can't do well at school and you can't work at the same time. You can't do
Yeah.
both, right?
Yeah.
There's also an assumption that if my son does well at school, that when they graduate, they're going to find a job, right? They're going to find a better job. And we can talk from first-hand experience. We both have master's degrees from some of the best universities in the world. That didn't help us get jobs. It wasn't the master's degrees that helped us get jobs or helped us get an income. It was our network of friends. It was our social skills. It was extra courses that we did that had nothing to do with our degrees.
Yeah.
It was experience that we picked up, hands-on experience. So if we actually look at how things are objectively, I believe, right, we'll find that the person who does start working from a young age, even if it means that they compromise a little bit on their results at school, they're going to be better trained and better experienced to get a better job later on in life, to make more money, to fulfill their responsibilities better, right? And the same goes for a woman. If we are agreeing that the best role a woman can do is to be a mother, okay? That doesn't mean that the other roles are haram upon her, and it doesn't mean she shouldn't pursue those roles. But again, like we said, what's the opportunity cost? Now, if we're saying that it's such a noble thing in Islam for a woman to be a mother, Jannah is at the feet of the mothers, right? We don't know that Jannah is at the feet of, the doctors, for example. It's not to belittle the position of being a doctor, but we're saying that, and look how much the Prophet ﷺ emphasized being a mother. If our daughters are going to be trained to be good wives from an early age and to be good mothers from an early age, which might mean helping around the house, which might mean learning certain skills that they won't learn in school, maybe there's an opportunity cost. Maybe they won't do as well in school as that girl who studies 24/7. But if we talk about her long-term success, maybe that is in her best interest. And I've seen some studies before where they get like kids in school, what they were like in school, and then like 30 years later or something, right? And it's like that kid that never did very well that wasn't doing very well at school, who used to just play sports and date girls or whatever. He picked up so many social skills. That's the main thing he came out with. That 30 years down the line, he has his own business, right? And he's employing that guy that used to get straight A's because he was studying all day. So long-term success as a man or woman is not dependent on how well you do at school. It's not dependent on the metrics that have been put in place by the education system.
Yeah.
It's dependent on things like, your character, your akhlaq, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your life skills, your networking skills.
Social skills. I remember there's this like phrase, I think they say in business or something, is that the B students hire the A students. Yeah. So like, or even the C students hire the A students, So the ones who maybe weren't the best in school, but those maybe they have something about them where they have this flair, they have this, I don't know, they just want to like, maybe they're a bit rebellious. They want to start a business. They start businesses and they end up hiring those that were just kind of sticking to the rules of the game in school kind of thing. So yeah, it can definitely play out like that. And yeah, I think going back to it's just like it's imbalanced in terms of, I think it's the time factor. Yeah. So you're in school, let's say, was it 8 a.m.? Usually you start school 8 a.m. till say 3 p.m. This is secondary school anyway. That is a long time that's a large part of your day. On top of that, you've got homework. And on top of that, you've got going to school, coming back from school. And you're doing that 5 days a week for like almost 2 decades, right?
Yeah. If you count it, it's like 12 to 13 years of education. Now you have kindergarten 1 and 2, so that makes it like what, 14 to 15 years of education. You have pre-kindergarten, which makes it 15 to 16 years of education, and then you have a degree, which is 3 to 5 years. Yeah. So you're talking about literally 20 plus years of education.
Yeah. So I think this is the main benefit of this like debate happening, is hopefully people would think about that big question, right? Of, is it worth putting, say 12 to 20 years, almost like a full-time commitment into school, like into the school. Yeah. I'm not going to say education. I'll say school in that intensive way, you know, because I remember, and also it's like there's the efficiency factor as well. I remember you used to tell me, like, when you were like really using these productivity kind of strategies when you're doing your master's degree, you're like, yeah, definitely you can do a bachelor's degree in 1 year, right? If you did it properly.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like if you're going to be in education full time for that long, like just think of what else you can do. Because, like, for example, me in business, I've been like at business for like 5, 6 years. And I wasn't learning like everything I know about business in a full-time capacity. I was learning it, you could say, in a part-time capacity. Yeah. But how much do I know? Like, I don't know. I probably know maybe top 10% of people in marketing, for example, in 5 years of part-time thing. So in full-time time scale, that might be a 1 year thing, a 2 year thing, right? Memorizing the Quran could be a 1 or 2 year thing, right? So how much could you really achieve in those 12 to 20 years you're spending in education full time? Like, again, it goes back to what you're saying, the, what's it called? The trade-off, basically, what's it called?
Opportunity cost.
Opportunity cost. I feel like there's a huge opportunity cost here, right?
There's a brother I know, and there's actually a few people I know of, but this brother I know personally, who basically he didn't go to school till he was like 14 or something, right? But that whole time he memorized Quran, he memorized Qur'at, he memorized Mutun, he studied books, and he had reached a really strong level in the sciences of Islam and in the sciences of Lugha, in language, and so on and so forth. And his first engagement with formal schooling was when he was 14 in the UK. And bro, I want to tell you, 16 years old, he did his GCSEs, he was like top of the class, okay? So A-levels, top of his class, he went to dental school, right? And I've heard loads of examples of this where like people, they're in like Somalia or Yemen or Egypt, their parents are trying to raise them to be ulama, and then something happens, war kicks off, the economic situation changes, they end up moving to the West, they've never learned English in their life, and then boom, within 2 years, they're top of the class, which is saying something. It's not about how long you're in the education system necessarily, right?
Interesting. Because I remember when I was teaching, there were a lot of kids coming from Somalia, like even till this day, like new people moving to the UK from Somalia. And, you know, decent amount of them, they'd never been to school in their life, you know, and they're like 13, 14. And they were like highlighting them as disadvantaged and stuff. But maybe what you're saying is that the kids you're talking about, they were getting an education prior to that. It's just not in school, right?
In school. And you said something about we're in education for 20 years, right? Or 20 plus years. And as Muslims, you know, this is not the way we should look at education. We look at education, if it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like it's a pursuit, it's a lifetime pursuit, right? So we're not saying 20 years of education is a waste of time, because your whole life should be ingrained with some sort of education and learning and development and coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what we're trying to say is perhaps for many people out there, that 20 years of formal secular education as it's presented to us today is not your best investment for time or money. It's not your best use of time. We're not saying that it's a waste of time to spend 20 years getting an education, because most of us don't even come out with a real education. When you go through the education system, I don't remember 90% of the stuff I learned at school or university, which means like I was just learning them to get through. I picked up some transferable skills, but did I need to be at university and school for like something like 24 years of my life to get those transferable skills?
Yeah. And there's a book that I want to bring up. Oh yeah, that's what it's called. The Case Against Education, right? This book is interesting. Basically, it makes the argument that there is no, and the guy that wrote it is like an economics professor, so he analyzes it from a very economics point of view. But he's like, there is zero benefit in the education system other than signaling, meaning having that signal, being able to signal to employers or whatever that you have passed certain hurdles, right? Which doesn't mean you're smart. It doesn't mean you have knowledge. It doesn't mean you have skills. It just means that you are like compliant enough and you were, you know, able to focus enough to get through school and get a degree, and that makes you employable apparently. So he's saying, and he quotes like so much research basically saying that you don't learn knowledge. But I always thought like, yeah, I don't learn knowledge at school, I forget it, right? Information, yani. But I do learn skills. But he even showed lots of studies to show that people actually don't learn skills in school or uni even, right? On average, of course, we're talking about. So even that is like it's a big blow, I guess, to the whole system.
I think there was a specific point that you mentioned, and it reminded me of something in the article where you said like you've been doing business for a few years and you've learned and benefited so much, even though it's not full time, right? Your life is not on hold to learn business. And imagine the trade-off. You know, imagine instead of going to school full time, if you'd been learning business from a young age, right? And for some reason, I made this link in my mind where Daniel, in his article, he mentions like, why should a woman, he's specifically talking about women, which is his topic, right? Why should a woman waste or spend the best years of her life, her youth, in education, okay, when that is the time she's most or best suited for marriage, right? Now, on the flip side, because you know, when you think of this, I'm always thinking of this first and foremost for myself as a man, right? And then I think about my daughters, my family. Why should a man spend the best years of his life where he has the most vigor, the most energy, he's most courageous, he's most fearless, he's most willing to take risks? That's what being a teenager is, right? You're willing to take risks, try things out. You don't have this fixed mindset. You're open to opportunities. Why should you spend that in a classroom, sitting on a chair,
Yeah.
passively receiving information that you're going to forget, rather than going out and experiencing life and going out and working and starting businesses? And interestingly, I don't know if there's any statistics to prove this, but anecdotally, from my experience, the students that were always the best achievers in university were the mature students who had a lot of life experience under their belt, and they knew why they were here, why they were studying what they're studying, and they were coming back to get an education. Whereas the younger students were always the guys that were, you know, they're young, they're passionate, they're trying things out, they want to go party, they want to do whatever they want to do, right? They're not so interested in the actual education side of university. So perhaps if men and women both spent those prime years, those teenage years, the years of their youth, you know, working, doing business, getting married, taking on responsibilities, whatever those responsibilities might be, and then they came back to education later, or their education was part-time, they would be more inclined to take their education seriously because they have life experience. They know they've made a conscious decision to study what they're studying for a reason.
And this is the big thing. This is the big thing is that the education system from nursery to university degree, it's an autopilot process where the assumption is you will always go from nursery to primary school, from primary school to secondary school, from secondary school to university. There is always that assumption. The first time you make an active decision about your education is, should I do master's degree or not? Like for many people, right? Some people make the decision at the age of leaving school or whatever, but many people, and that's the aspiration really, is that you'll just keep going until you like finish uni. And again, why do they stop? Why do most people stop at the degree? Interestingly, this just came to my mind. Like, it's because apparently at that level, now you can do something which is a higher priority than being in full-time education, which is what? Making money. Yeah. So again, it shows the priorities of the system, right? It's like, okay, we indoctrinated you with what we, want you to, the way we want you to think. We've given you like, not really skills, but we've processed you enough that you're like kind of compliant enough and all of that. And now you go and make money for the economy, for the GDP, for the tax budget, for this and that. And it's like, yeah, now go out there. And by the way, when you go and work, don't keep learning. No, don't do that. Just go and do what you're told and, suck up to your manager and retire 20, 40 years later, Or not even 40 these days, like maybe 50, 50 years later. There's very much an autopilot process, which is what us as Muslims, we don't want to fall into, because this hadith, the first hadith, everyone always mentions, innama al-a'malu bin-niyat. One thing I take from that is that you shouldn't be on autopilot. Everything should have an intention. So even if you're going from like year 10 to 11 or year 11 to 12, there should be an intention as to why I'm actively choosing to continue this.
And a lot of those people who make that decision not to continue their education after school, it's not like they made a conscious decision. It's just that they were doing poorly at school, so they were like, know what, I want to continue. So it's like, it wasn't even a intentional thing, it was kind of forced upon them.
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind, which is thinking about some of the stuff we've said, and a lot of the stuff that Daniel was saying in the debate and in the article. It's kind of in the realm of how things should be.
Yeah.
Right. What's right and wrong, that kind of education should be, and why people should go to school and university. But we're not addressing practical realities around us, and we're not giving people, and we're not even presenting for ourselves an alternative way of doing things.
Yeah.
And the reason I find it so concerning is something happened in Egypt, I think it was in the 90s, where there was this campaign by the mashayikh in Egypt, the ulama, especially those who were of like a Salafi inclination, right? And these ulama, we love them, we respect them, we benefited from them a lot. They came on the minbar and they would say, it's no longer an honor to study in Azhar. There's no benefit in studying in Azhar. Take your children out of Azhar. And they made this campaign highlighting all of the disadvantages of Azhar, all of the criticisms of Azhar, okay? Whether it's the curriculums are weaker today than ever before. The positions of the mashayikh are politicized, whether it's the aqidah element, whether it's, and they made all of this list of the terrible things that, is now doing, and a lot of people took their children out of Azhar. But the problem is the infrastructure didn't exist for those children to go and study in a better institute, right? So for those scholars who were on the minbar, they could teach their children the deen at home because they were scholars. For those scholars on the minbar, they had durus in their local masajid that their children could attend. So their children had an alternative. But when it became an issue of advocating public policy, getting on the minbar and speaking to the guy who doesn't even have an education, speaking to the guy whose wife doesn't have an education, or maybe his wife works a full-time job for the purpose of survival, not for some ideological reason, right? What happens is those people, when they took their children out of Azhar, they didn't have a realistic alternative. There wasn't an infrastructure to absorb those people. They put them in public schools. In public schools, there's free mixing in university. They don't memorize Quran. They don't study the Arabic language to a proficient level. They don't learn their Fard Ain knowledge. So you left Azhar, where it was segregated, up until university. So you can graduate from university in Azhar, and you never mixed with the opposite gender, right? With the exception of some teachers, right? But I mean, on the level of students. You memorize the entire Quran twice by the time you finish your degree. You study the Arabic language all the way up to Alfiyat ibn Malik. You study your Fard Ain knowledge, and you study the fiqh of one of the madahib at least 3 times if you graduate from the university, twice if you graduate from high school. With all the disadvantages in that education system, at least you're coming out with that.
Yeah.
Now, when people went to public schools, and I've seen this firsthand, you see a family of 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 children. All the children have Fard Quran, they're practicing, they pray in the masjid, the women wear jilbab and khimar, they wear niqab, they're strict with gender segregation. Younger kids are wearing necklaces, they smoke, they listen to music because they were indoctrinated by the public schooling system because their parents took them out of Azhar because of some aqidah issue, or because Azhar is not as strong as it used to be, or because it's politicized. So, point being, and by the way, these same ulama realized their mistake. And today their children are students in Azhar, right? Because they realized, especially after political events that took place, that they didn't have the infrastructure to provide an alternative on a large scale. So for you, for me, for Daniel, for whoever else out there who wants to homeschool their kids, or who wants to move to a Muslim country, or who wants to, provide some sort of special community for their children to be advantaged, that's great. On a personal level, you can make that decision. And kullukum ra'in, you're responsible for that, right? But I'm always concerned with when we're in front of the camera, when we're on YouTube, or addressing large numbers of people. It might be hundreds, it might be thousands, it might be, in the case of someone like Daniel, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. I'm highlighting the problem, and we're not giving people a solution that is practical. And we don't even have the infrastructure to support the theoretical solution that we're offering.
Yeah.
In the comment section, and I always like to read the comments, not the reason being to understand what people took from the discussion, right? A sister came along and she said something to the effect of, my parents are retired, they can't spend on me, I don't have siblings, I'm not married, I wish I could get married, I'm waiting, I think she even said something like, I'm like a sitting duck waiting for someone to propose to me. So she's clearly not like anti-marriage, she doesn't want marriage, but she's like, for the purpose of survival, I have to work. Who's going to provide for me? And getting a degree has helped me to work an honorable, respectable job that gives me an income that means something,
Yeah.
right? And then someone comes along in the comments, and I can't remember what they said exactly, but they basically accused her of being an undercover feminist just for asking a question. Okay, and he's like, if you're not married, then you should get married. I mean, she wants to get married and she can't get married. If you're not married or your husband dies, your father must provide for you. Your father's an old man, he's retired, he can't provide for her. He's ill, he's dead. If your father, then his brothers. If your brothers, then and then in the end he says, and if no one can provide for you, the Khalifa must provide for you. Yeah, akhi, what Khalifa are you talking about?
Yeah.
Obviously, this is someone in the comment section. And again, this is not about that person, it's not about Daniel, it's not about people, but it's about the idea of, if we romanticize what should, morality, basically, how things should be.
Yeah.
And we have this unrealistic view of how things should be without offering practical solutions, we end up with this, where a sister, she's just trying to survive and she wants a solution. And then on the flip side, the brother is like, the Khalifa should provide. And this is what we get. So when we're advocating on a public platform for public policy, we need to discuss alternatives. So, I mean, I've talked a lot, so I'm going to give it to you on this topic of alternatives.
Yeah. So just before we get into that, Akhi, like what, first, like staying on this like moral thing of what should and should not happen, what is your thinking around everything we've said about like rubbishing the education system and how it's imbalanced and all that? Do you think, though, there is a difference between men and women going through that system that's in place right now? Like basically what Daniel Hagigaju is saying is that there is no place for women and girls in that thing. Men, I guess like they have to because that's their way to earn a living eventually. But how do you see it? Like you have daughters. So, yeah, are you seeing that for men and for girls and boys it's exactly the same, or it's different for different, sexes?
I think we can agree that men and women are not the same. Boys and girls are not the same, right? Not in terms of biologically, hormonally, not in terms of their specific rights and responsibilities in the Sharia. And so it's not far-fetched to then say that they will be affected differently by this. And if you put a man and a woman in the same circumstance, they're gonna be affected differently, right?
Yes.
If you take a man and a woman and put them in the workplace, it doesn't affect them in the same way, right? And similarly, I think it's not far-fetched to say education affects men and women differently.
Yeah.
Does it harm women more than men? I don't know if we can make that argument, right? Because I can see the potential harms existing for both men and women, and I've seen it in both men and women, right? I've seen men and women who go to university and they get influenced by a lot of the things in university.
Yeah, but I don't think he was saying that it harms women more than men. He was saying that it harms both, but men have to go.
Yeah, so exactly. So what his argument is men have a responsibility to provide. So if this is a means to be able to provide, then they have to do it, or they're more obliged to do it. But women don't even have that obligation. So why are they even going to university, right?
Yeah.
That's his argument. And yeah, I mean, if the objective for you going to university is to get a job, first and foremost, whether you're a man or a woman, and you're not even obliged to work, and it's not your Sharia obligation to work, and the opportunity cost, and you're going to university, what you're going to lose out on is something from your Fard Ain obligations, then of course, you should put your Fard Ain obligations first.
Is it as black and white as that? Like, for example, okay, to put it into context, if I live in the UK, would you say like putting my daughter into school is endangering her basic like iman?
No, I'm saying hypothetically. I'm not.
Okay, but now on the reality,
I'm saying hypothetically, if we believe that there is a threat, because everybody's in different circumstances. Yeah. I'm conscious about what I'm saying because I'm talking to people on a public platform all over the world, right?
Yeah.
So you have to make that informed decision based on your circumstances. If you sincerely believe that your son or daughter, their iman is in danger, by them going to school or university, or by them going to a particular school or university, or for them by them going into formal schooling.
Yeah.
And on top of that, an alternative exists.
Yeah.
Then why do you put your children through that?
Yeah. And that applies for men and women, right? Girls and boys. Yeah, because if something is going to endanger your son's aqidah, his basic belief, there's no excuse for him to go to school to earn a living. Like if his basic iman is going to be at danger.
And especially when alternatives exist. I mean, if we just look around us, we know so many people who have gone to university, they've gotten degrees, and it hasn't benefited them very much economically, right? You know, if we see university as an economic investment, then most of the people we know who are economically successful didn't go to university. Or if they did, their economic success is not as a result of them going to university, right? It's a result of other factors. So if I'm going to endanger my son's iman, okay, because maybe when he graduates, he'll have a degree on his CV that will help him get a job. And I have so many other ways into the job market. I have so many different business opportunities. I have so many different ways to teach him skills. I have even so many different ways to get him a degree without being put in the same amount of fitna. Makes no sense for me to put my son into that. And the same goes for women. And on top of the fact, everything we've mentioned, if I don't expect her to work anyway, okay, so if you're like someone who's traditionalist in your worldview, you take Islam traditionally in a traditional way, probably you're going to agree that you would want your daughter to be in a position where her husband provides for her.
Yeah.
You don't want your daughter to be in a position where she's forced to work.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're probably going to do whatever is in your ability to ensure that whoever marries your daughter is able to provide for her.
Yeah.
And you're going to do whatever is in your ability to be able to provide for your daughter. So that, on top of what we said, which also applies to men, which is the alternatives that exist and so on and so forth, will shape your decision.
That was part one of this discussion on education. The next part is going to be way more practical. We're going to talk about what would you specifically do practically. You've got daughters. The world we live in today is not always ideal. So instead of looking at this should be the case, this should be the case, we're going to be talking about what practically we can do in this world, in the current setup that we live in. So look out for that, inshallah. It's going to be really good. I didn't want 1 hour and 45-minute episode. I wanted to make it 2 shorter episodes. So look out for part 2, inshallah. And as usual, check out mindheistpodcast.com if you want to get in touch with us. Give us your comments, your ideas, your feedback by email or anonymously on Curious Cat, or even just in the YouTube comments. You can find the links to all that in the description of this, and or just go straight to the website. Assalamu alaikum. See you around.